Thank you for sharing this detailed transcript. Here's a carefully rewritten, more concise and polished version that preserves all original facts and meaning, approximately 20% shorter. Thank you for joining us for this episode. If you know of an intriguing case that was eventually solved, please visit the designated case page on our website, clelisted.com. We're also interested in hearing about compelling true crime stories and paranormal phenomena for our 2 YouTube channels, Clelisted and Paranormally Listed. In this episode, we revisit an event from February 1975. Near midnight on February 12th, a fire broke out on the 11th floor of One World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. The flames quickly spread downward to the 9th floor and upward to the 14th. At the time, 50 maintenance workers were in the building. Responding promptly, a team of 132 firefighters extinguished the blaze, ensuring no fatalities. Still, 64 people, including 16 firefighters, sustained minor injuries, and property damage amounted to $2 million, roughly $1.6 million when adjusted for inflation in 2024. Investigations later concluded that the fire was arson. In May of that year, 19-year-old custodian Oswald Arroyo was charged. He claimed the fire was a protest against his employer, feeling undervalued and unrecognized. Little is known about his fate after arrest. In 2081, a $45 million sprinkler system was installed in both towers to prevent future disasters. On the same day, a tragic train collision occurred in Norway. 2 northbound and southbound trains traveling on the same track near Tatum collided head-on about half a mile from Trenton Station. Each train carried roughly 400 passengers, mostly skiers. The crash resulted in 27 deaths, including 7 children, and injured 25 others, making it Norway's deadliest peacetime rail accident. The northbound train from Oslo was running late. Its engineer, waiting for the southbound train to pass, did not realize the second train's approach. Following this accident, Norwegian rail safety measures were significantly tightened. That February is also notable for the birth of Drew Barrymore in Culver City, California. She is the daughter of John Drew Barrymore and Jade Barrymore, and hails from a family with a rich acting heritage. Her paternal great-grandparents, grandparents, and father were all actors. Drew began acting early, with her first film in 1980, Altered States. She gained international fame in 1982 as part of the cast of E.T. the Extraterrestrial. As a child, she became the youngest person to host Saturday Night Live. Her mother often took her to nightclubs, leading Drew into struggles with drugs and alcohol during adolescence, and her acting career slowed down. However, establishing her own production company, Flower Films, in 1995 revitalized her career, resulting in roles in Charlie's Angels, The Wedding Singer, and Never Been Kissed. In September 2020, she launched The Drew Barrymore Show, which she continues to host. On February 25, 1975, the top Billboard song was Baby Come to Me by Patty Austin and James Ingram. The leading box office hit was The Towering Inferno. That month, 9-year-old Marsha Trimble lived in the well-to-do neighborhood of Green Hills in Nashville, Tennessee. Her father, Charles, was a salesperson. Her mother, Virginia, a homemaker, and her 12-year-old brother, Chuck, attended school nearby. On February 25, Marsha watched Gilligan's Island after returning home. She then left with her friend March Egerton to deliver cookies she had taken orders for. Charlie, her neighbor, saw them walking and stopped his car to chat. Marsha assured him she'd be home soon. When she arrived home, her grandmother dropped off some dessert, and Marsha gave her the cookies she ordered. She told her mother she was going to deliver one last box of cookies to a neighbor, Marsha Maxwell, who was not at home during Marsha's first visit. Marsha had told her mother she'd be right back, sometime between 5:15 and 5:25 p.m. Let me know if you'd like further adjustments or additional details. When Marsha left her home, her brother Chuck and March were playing basketball in the driveway. She was gone only a few minutes before failing to return. Her family immediately began searching for her, speaking with Marsha Maxwell, whose house Marsha was headed toward. Marie said Marsha did not come to her home. She saw her arrive around 5:30, standing in her neighbor's driveway with two males, one shorter and one taller, both partly obscured by a hedge. Marie guessed the shorter might have been another child, while the taller was dressed in a long, dark coat. She noticed that Marsha had a box of cookies, expecting her to come by later to drop them off. Meanwhile, Marsha did not show up, prompting her family to patrol the neighborhood, but they found no sign of her. About 2 hours after her disappearance, her parents officially reported her missing, prompting an immediate police search. Later, witnesses reported seeing a girl matching Marsha's description roughly 3/10 of a mile from where Marsha Maxwell saw her, around the same time. However, this girl did not carry her cookie box, which stood out as a vital clue. Another witness later saw her walking in the opposite direction, a short distance from that spot, about 5 minutes later. This girl also appeared confused and was without her cookie box. The detective later believed that a child had likely stolen the box, which contained about $20, and that Marsha had chased after the thief, which only added to everyone's concern. Sadly, 9-year-old Marsha was not found that night. As dawn broke, hundreds of volunteers joined the search, and the police established a command post at the family's house. The FBI became involved, but despite all efforts, no trace of her was uncovered. This story highlights the distressing reality of missing children cases, where hope often diminishes as hours pass without clues. Exactly 31 days had passed since Marsha Maxwell vanished on what should have been her 10th birthday, a day that held no joy for her grieving family. It was Good Friday, a time when her devout family of Christians in Virginia watched and prayed, holding on to hope that divine intervention would bring her back. They believed that miracles could still occur, trusting that God would eventually return their daughter. 2 days later, on Easter Sunday, Charles, Virginia, and Chuck Trimble attended church services, seeking comfort in their faith. But their hopes were shattered when, upon returning home, they were met by the police chief and a homicide detective. The worst news awaited them. Marsha's body had been discovered in a seldom-used shed behind a neighbor's house, about 200 yards from their own residence. The shed, described in Doug Jones and Phil Scabell's book, A Season of Darkness, as a Marva shed, lacked windows or doors and was used for storage by its owners. An owner's brother-in-law, searching for a cover for an outboard motor, entered the shed and initially thought he saw a doll. But upon closer inspection, he recognized the figure as Marsha, her body lying motionless in the corner. The police were stunned by this find, especially considering that multiple searches had already been conducted in that location. At least 9 individuals had searched the shed in the days immediately following Marsha's disappearance. Early on, her family and volunteers scoured the area, with law enforcement, 3 police cadets, searching it just 3 days after she went missing. Despite these efforts, no sign of her was found until that moment, 33 days later. There are various reasons suggested for this delay in discovery, but the narrative is complex, and the story remains one of tragic mystery and unanswered questions. The body was concealed amid various items in the garage, making it difficult to spot. A detective noted that numerous objects hidden among the clutter masked the corpse. So much so that even when officers entered knowing the body was inside, they could not see it until it was specifically pointed out. One theory suggests that the killer kept Marsha alive for days or even weeks before ending her life. She was murdered in the garage, either where she was killed or elsewhere, and then her body was disposed of there. The forensic pathologist concluded that Marsha was killed on the very night she disappeared. She had been strangled, despite being clothed. Evidence showed she had been sexually assaulted, with Sean found in her vagina and on her clothes. A third possibility posited that her body was stored elsewhere before being placed in the garage. Initially, it was unclear if her body had been moved after death, as the medical examiner could not determine this definitively. However, this theory faced significant problems. Why would the killer dump the body so close to the victim's home, especially when the area and police were on high alert? Why not dispose of her body in a remote rural location? One plausible explanation was that the murderer lived nearby and lacked access to a vehicle. The investigation paused briefly for a message from our sponsor. Stephen King praises a new thriller by the best-selling author Emo Jean, describing it as a compelling blend of suspense, sharp characterization, and intricate mystery. He emphasizes that he couldn't put it down, eager to uncover every twist. In the story, Detective Chelsea Calhoun's life is turned upside down by the reappearance of Ellie Black, a girl who disappeared years earlier but is found alive in the Washington woods. Ellie's return compels Chelsea to confront dangerous truths. The novel, The Return of Ellie Black, is available wherever books are sold. The FBI's profile indicated the killer was likely a white teenage boy familiar with Marsha. One of the last people to see her was 15-year-old Jeffrey Wass. His family lived just 5 houses down the street from Marsha's, across from her home. When the police first questioned Jeff, he was not at home. Later, upon learning the police were looking for him, Jeffrey visited the Trimble's residence. He claimed that his mother had sent him to buy cookies, but when Marsha arrived at his house, he didn't have enough money to pay her, promising to settle later. Police then asked Jeffrey to empty his pockets, revealing a $5 bill, some change, a partial roll of pennies, and a box of condoms. The officers found this odd because Jeffrey insisted he had no money for cookies, yet Marsha's cookie money was missing from her box. She kept at least 1 roll of pennies. Jeffrey explained he worked for his neighbor Peggy Morgan, who lived next door, but his connection to her was not further elaborated. Jeffrey ran a daycare out of his home, and after Mara disappeared, he visited her house. He claimed that Morgan had given him money, which he and another staff member, Amy Norville, used to buy dinner for the children at the daycare. The leftover change from his shift was all the cash he had received. When Mara was missing, Jeffrey searched for her and eventually abandoned Rocky, his dog, out of concern. Concerning the condoms, Jeffrey explained he purchased them for a concert he planned to attend that weekend. During his interview, Peggy Morgan entered and stated that Jeffrey had been with her all evening and had done nothing wrong. The police found this suspicious, especially because Mara was still missing, and Morgan's overly protective attitude toward Jeffrey struck them as unusual. Early on, investigators became wary of Jeffrey, noting his long hair and the fact that he had EU written on his tennis shoes. His parents soon learned he was considered a person of interest in the case. Within days of Mara's kidnapping, Jeffrey's parents hired an attorney, and he ceased cooperating with authorities, refusing a polygraph test. This refusal intensified police suspicions. Later, Jeffrey took a private polygraph, which confirmed he was truthful when asserting he had no involvement in Mara's disappearance. He also passed a second exam at the police station, but suspicion persisted. The police investigated his alibi thoroughly. Jeffrey claimed he was working at Peggy Morgan's house when Mara went missing. Morgan, however, said she was with him but admitted she had stayed home until 6:15, then went bowling with Amy Norville. Morgan also said Jeffrey arrived early that afternoon, was sweaty and hot, having been playing basketball with some boys, though the boys told police Jeffrey was not actually playing with them. Jeffrey insisted he had been, but the boys' statements contradicted his account. The police questioned Amy Norville, who confirmed that Jeffrey arrived at the daycare early that day. She said Jeffrey briefly left around 4:30, returning about 30 minutes later, which is also when Mara was seen walking with her friend, March Ederton. Norville verified that they spoke to Jeffrey during that time. Additionally, Norville stated she and Morgan left the daycare between 5 and 5:15 p.m. to go to McDonald's. They returned half an hour later, but interestingly, it was Morgan who handed Norville the money for the meal, not Jeffrey, as he had told police he only had change left over from his work shift. Norville added that she and Morgan departed at around 6:15 p.m., further complicating Jeffrey's alibi. Jeffrey had gone bowling, remaining at the daycare until all the children had been picked up. Meanwhile, Amy Norville shared troubling allegations, claiming that 15-year-old Jeffrey was involved in an affair with 32-year-old Peggy Morgan. She also accused Jeffrey of kissing a 9-year-old girl at the daycare, prompting the girl's mother to remove her immediately. Peggy Morgan, who managed the daycare, was questioned and denied any affair with Jeffrey. She insisted that the girl's departure was unrelated to any inappropriate behavior from Jeffrey. Despite passing a polygraph test, investigators remained wary, as Jeffrey's actions raised suspicions. For example, why would he ask friends like Salai to provide an alibi for the hours before the murder? Further complicating the case, Jeffrey's statement about the source of money he used was inconsistent. If Amy Norville had received the food money, why did Jeffrey claim that was his source? The detective's main concern was Jeffrey's apparent alibi. Marsha went missing between 5:15 and 5:25, while Jeffrey left Peggy Morgan's house around 4:30 and returned shortly thereafter, close to the time Marsha disappeared. Policemen hypothesized that Jeffrey had returned to the daycare after 5:30, and then they headed to McDonald's. Yet, they questioned whether Norville might be mistaken about the timeline. A critical witness, Marsha Maxwell, had seen Marsha talking to two individuals near the time of her disappearance. When asked if Jeffrey was one of those people, Maxwell, who had been examined about 20 times, hesitated before saying she had a gut feeling it was him. She also thought the shorter person with Marsha could have been Marge Ederton, who had been walking with Marsha earlier. Forensic examinations provided no evidence of foul play regarding Marsha's body. Investigators analyzed the soil on her shoes and found it consistent with her voluntarily entering the garage, with no indication of her being dragged. An expert on decomposition studied insects nesting in her remains and determined that, based on insect generations, her body likely had not been moved since she went missing. Additionally, the blood pooling in her body suggested she had remained in the same position. Thus, authorities concluded that on the day she vanished, she was either lured or led into the garage, where she was killed. Both police and her family believed Marsha would not have entered the garage willingly with a stranger. The puzzling part was that at least 9 people searched that garage without discovering her body, which was later confirmed to be present all along. One of those searchers was Jeffrey Wack. Despite years of investigation and ruling out numerous suspects, Jeffrey Wack remained a person of interest. By June of 1976, the case persisted unresolved, with investigators yet to determine who was truly responsible for Marsha's death. Over the years, Jeffrey remained their sole suspect. The neighborhood kids often taunted him, mocking his status as the prime suspect by jokingly declaring, "Yeah, I killed her," or "Yeah, I raped her." Yet, despite these accusations, law enforcement officials struggled to find physical evidence linking Jeffrey to the murder of 9-year-old Mara Trimble in late 1977. At the time, Jeffrey, aged 18, worked at a local restaurant where an undercover officer posed as a colleague, attempting to coax him into confessing. However, Jeffrey refused to disclose anything incriminating. In a strategic move, one detective tried to provoke Jeffrey into talking. When Jeffrey entered the restaurant that day to drink at the bar, he recognized the officer and became visibly nervous. He then warned him that the detective was trying to connect him to a girl's murder, noting that Mara was wrapped in a tarp at the crime scene. This detail caught investigators' attention because the covering materials found on Mara's body included an old shower curtain with a paint stain. Detectives initially believed it was used as a drop cloth during a painting project. The police collected paint samples from nearby homes and sent them to the FBI for analysis, which revealed the paint matched that from the house where Jeffrey worked at a daycare, an address he was at the night Mara disappeared. Consequently, in 1981, Jeffrey, then 20, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Despite being just 15 at the time of the crime, prosecutors decided to try him as an adult. However, months later, the district attorney announced the case would not go to the grand jury, and soon after, he admitted that Jeffrey's arrest had been premature. The FBI's paint analysis had been inconclusive, as several homes in the neighborhood had similar paint, and the evidence linking Jeffrey was weak. An additional complication was a sum of money found on Jeffrey. Police believed he stole it from Mara, but Jeffrey explained it was earned from his newspaper route. He also stated that he didn't see the need to pay Mara for cookies, since his mother was supposed to pay her. A year after the arrest, in August of 1980, all charges against Jeffrey were dismissed. Later, when the district attorney was up for re-election, he publicly described Jeffrey's arrest as a grave injustice. Nevertheless, skepticism persisted. Many investigators continued to suspect Jeffrey was guilty of Mara's murder. The devastating event profoundly affected her family. Her parents, Charles and Virginia, divorced in 1989, citing differing ways of coping with their grief. Tragically, just 3 days after their divorce was finalized, Charles died from lung and liver cancer at the age of 52. Virginia remained in their family home until the late 1990s, clinging to memories and the unresolved pain of that unresolved case. In 1990, a new house replaced the old demolished structure on the same property. That year, authorities announced they were re-examining the case, with DNA testing planned on Marsha's pants, which had a semen stain. They successfully developed a DNA profile and compared it to Jeffrey Wilmax, but he was not a match. Despite the passage of 15 years, suspicion around Jeffrey lingered, yet tests against 7 other local residents at the time also yielded no results. By 1996, improved DNA techniques allowed investigators to generate a complete profile, and over 100 individuals were tested, all with negative outcomes. In November of 2007, a suspect previously unknown to police emerged, marking a significant turn after more than 3 decades. Meanwhile, cultural milestones from different eras reflected the changing times. In 1975, popular films included Monty Python and the Holy Grail, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and The Stepford Wives, while the documentary Grey Gardens captivated audiences with its story of a mother and daughter living in decay in East Hampton, who were relatives of Jackie Kennedy Onassis. This documentary became a major hit, and years later, Drew Barrymore starred in a dramatized adaptation sharing the same title. Fast forward to 2007, when blockbuster films such as 300, Juno, and Superbad topped the box office. The musical landscape also evolved. The top 3 hits of 1975 were Love Will Keep Us Together by Captain and Tennille, Rhinestone Cowboy by Glenn Campbell, and Philadelphia Freedom by Elton John. Nearly 32 years later, the charts were dominated by artists like Flo Rida, featuring T-Pain with Low, Leona Lewis with Bleeding Love, and Alicia Keys' No One. Television saw new favorites debuting in 1975, including Starsky and Hutch, The $6 Million Man, and Welcome Back, Kotter. By 2007, reality and sitcoms gained prominence with Keeping Up with the Kardashians, The Big Bang Theory, and Mad Men capturing viewers' attention. Literary achievements from 1975 included Mary Higgins Clark's Where Are the Children, Elle DeBarge's Time, and Larry McMurtry's Terms of Endearment. While in 2007, the Harry Potter series concluded with Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Stieg Larsson's The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest, and Jay Asher's 13 Reasons Why made a mark. During spring of 2007, detectives investigated a murder that had occurred just 3 weeks before Marsha's death in February of 1975. The victim, Sarah D., known as Sally, was a 19-year-old college student at Vanderbilt University in Nashville. Her divorced parents, both physicians, had a home nearby where Sally had lived from age 9 until her death, just a block from Marsha's residence, highlighting a possible connection in the ongoing investigation. In February of 1975, just 3 miles from her home, the body of Marsha was discovered on the same street where the district attorney resided. That same night, Sally, who lived alone in an apartment about a block from the university, had gone on a date with a senior student, They watched a murder mystery at the cinema, then went to a bar followed by his fraternity house, drinking together until Sally became ill. Her date then drove her home. Sally was employed as a night clerk at a campus dormitory and had not reported for her shift on February 2nd. When her father, who held a key, along with her brother, entered her apartment, they found her dead on the bed. The young woman, just 19, had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Since there were no signs of forced entry, investigators believed she either knew her attacker or was followed home, possibly waiting inside or lurking in the hall. Despite extensive efforts, no arrest was made, and the case grew cold over the years. In spring of 2007, a family member approached the Nashville police, prompting officials to reassess the unsolved murder. The investigators reviewed the case files and decided to reopen the inquiry. Evidence from the scene was sent to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's crime lab, where DNA analysis produced a profile. This profile was entered into a national database, but initially no match was found. However, by October of that year, a breakthrough occurred. The DNA matched that from a different homicide, Marsha's murder. Neither crime had been linked previously, but similarities soon became clear. Both victims had been sexually assaulted and strangled, and their killings occurred just 23 days apart in neighborhoods less than 5 miles apart. Some suspects linked to Sally's case had never been investigated in connection with Marsha's murder. Notably, evidence found on Sally's body, specifically pubic hair from a black male, had not been considered in the context of Marsha's case. The FBI's profile suggested the killer was likely a young white man, fitting the demographic landscape of Green Hills, an area predominantly inhabited by white residents who knew each other well. No witnesses reported seeing a black man near the scene. One suspect in Sally's case was Jerome Sidney Barrett, born in April of 1948 in Memphis, Tennessee. After high school graduation in the late 1960s, Barrett began encountering trouble with the law. He was suspected in a robbery but not charged, and in the book, A Season of Darkness, it's noted that Barrett was briefly detained for 2 days in connection with Sally's murder, but was ultimately released without charges. Later, in 1968, Barrett faced charges for a series of robberies, but details of whether he was ever conclusively linked to the murders remain unclear. After being acquitted, he enlisted in the Army, serving as a helicopter mechanic in Vietnam. In September of 1969, he faced court-martial for attempting to desert. Following his tour, he returned to the United States and sought mental health treatment. Discharged in 1971, he went back to his hometown of Memphis, where he earned money through street fighting. His troubled nature persisted, and by 1973, he was arrested after stabbing a woman and attempting to rape her. Although the charges were eventually dropped, later that year he was convicted of multiple sex crimes, including having an affair with a minor, leading to a 10-year prison sentence. He was imprisoned in Tennessee State Prison in Nashville, but was released after serving only a year and a half. Soon after his release, he did not leave Nashville. On March 12, 1975, a few weeks prior to Marsha's murder, police responded to a report of a man breaking into an apartment on the city's outskirts. Officers encountered a man wearing a ski mask and a dark overcoat, armed with a heavy gun, attempting to force entry into other units. Identified as Drew Barrymore, he was detained and linked to 3 violent crimes committed weeks earlier. On February 16th, a 23-year-old student at Belmont University was raped at the knife point in her dorm, and the attacker stole various possessions. Less than a week later, on February 23rd, a 24-year-old woman was stabbed outside her Nashville home. She survived but was severely wounded. On March 9th, another young woman, aged 22, was raped at gunpoint. Police searched Barrett's apartment and found belongings belonging to the Belmont student, and 2 other victims identified him as their attacker. Barrett confessed to the February rape. In 1976, he was convicted of rape and sentenced to 60 years in prison. After serving over 26 years, he was paroled in 2002. Barrett had been a suspect in Sally Dia's murder because the crime showed similarities to the earlier attacks linked to him. While incarcerated, a detective requested the FBI to compare Barrett's hair samples with evidence from Sally's case. However, this comparison was never carried out. Authorities believed Barrett posed a strong suspect because Sally was killed 2 weeks before the Belmont student was raped, and Marsha was murdered 9 days after that assault, just 2 days before Barrett stabbed a woman outside her home. Upon release in 2002, Barrett returned to Memphis, residing with his elderly father, running a hair business, and heading the neighborhood watch. In October 2007, police obtained a warrant to collect his DNA, which was later matched to evidence from both crime scenes. A few weeks after the match, Barrett was arrested for Sally Dia's murder, confirming his link to her death and the previously unexplored connection to the other violent crimes. In the autumn of 1974, Jerome Barrett was arrested on Vanderbilt campus for soliciting donations for the Nation of Islam. His criminal history also included attacking young women around Sally's age, and in 1973, he had been convicted of having sex with a minor. Most of his previous victims were in their early 20s, so Mara's profile did not exactly match those he had targeted before. Authorities couldn't place Barrett in Marsha's neighborhood, as no witnesses reported seeing a tall black man there, which made it difficult for police to connect him to the crime. His lawyer argued that there might have been lab mishandling, or that DNA evidence had been planted, claiming the DNA did not conclusively prove Barrett's guilt. Even the prosecutors were uncertain. While they believed the DNA evidence placed Barrett at the scene, they still thought Jeffrey Wack was the real killer. Despite there being no forensic link to him, the police continued their investigation, attempting to associate Barrett with the neighborhood, but the evidence was inconclusive until he was arrested for breaking into apartments on March 12, 1975. Just over 2 weeks after Marsha's murder. He was seen wearing a long, dark overcoat, which was significant because Marsha Maxwell had reported seeing Marsha speaking to a man dressed similarly. However, Maxwell had only a vague memory of the man's face and wasn't sure of his race, which weakened the identification. In June of 2007, prosecutors charged Barrett with Marsha's murder after sufficient evidence surfaced. The following January, he faced trial for Sally Dia's killing, which had occurred over 3 decades earlier. The trial lasted 4 days, with the jury deliberating for only an hour and a half, resulting in Barrett's conviction and a sentence of life imprisonment. Half a year later, in July of 2008, Barrett's trial for Marsha's murder commenced. The key evidence was DNA from Marsha's clothing, showing a statistically impossible match, 1 in a trillion odds, linking him to the crime. Yet, the defense argued that Barrett's absence from the neighborhood and his dissimilarity to the sketch Maxwell provided cast doubt on the case. Maxwell testified that she saw 3 individuals that day, a short male and a tall male, but she didn't see the tall man's face or know his race. She admitted she made up details about her description under pressure, aiming to help locate the missing girl. 2 prison acquaintances of Barrett also testified, claiming that he had confessed to killing women, though he never disclosed specific details. After a 3-day trial, the jury deliberated for 7 hours over 2 days before convicting Barrett of second-degree murder. During the sentencing hearing, Marsha's mother, Virginia, then using her maiden name, Ritter, wished to forgive Barrett, but he chose to waive his right to be present. He was sentenced to 44 years in prison. As of the time of this account, 75-year-old Jerome Barrett remains incarcerated at the Morgan County Corrections Department. If you found this episode engaging, I recommend exploring the book A Season of Darkness by Doug Jones and Phyllis Scoble. It served as an essential source of information for preparing this discussion, offering many additional details we couldn't cover here. That's all for today. Thank you for tuning in.